Hello, people. Just on here to talk about these impeachment hearings and I guess this whole impeachment topic in general, as it's so prominent in political news and current events so far today. Just going to give some of my observations and some of my thinking on what I've been observing in relationship to these impeachment proceedings. I've watched some of them. I watched some of it yesterday, some of it today, and just going to give some considerations that have been running around in my mind about it. And hopefully, some of this will resonate with what you're thinking about it, or maybe if you didn't think about it, maybe it'll bring up some new issues for you to consider in your opinion about what's transpiring here. Now everybody's biased. We know some people are on Trump's side, some people are on the Democrat side. Personally, I tend to, don't get me wrong. If President Trump did something wrong, he should be held accountable for it. But at the same time, I think anybody else who did something wrong should be investigated, and they should be held to account as well. So with that in mind, what I'm going to do is go over a few of the topics or points that stuck out to me about these impeachment proceedings and reflect what I'm thinking, and maybe it'll jar you to think about it as well. I could be totally off base, or I could be, onto something. So, in any event, let's talk about it. So, first, I'll go over the points that caught my attention first, and then I'll come back, and then go into depth about each one. And I think I got nine, at least eight, maybe 9 points. Point number one is that in all these hearings so far, we have not heard from any firsthand witnesses. Number two, it would appear that there's a denial of due process that I've been observing. Number three, there seems to be selective investigation, where they only want to investigate certain people, but other people seem to not be subject to any type of investigation. Point number four is that as far as the allegations made against President Trump, it was alleged that he asked the Ukrainian president to make up dirt on this so-called political rival. But I didn't see any of that in the transcript, and I didn't see any evidence of him asking for anybody to make up any dirt. Now I did see where he asked maybe for an investigation. Point number five is, as I was thinking about it, I'm wondering now, how did President Trump actually feel the need to have the Ukraine create some type of dirt on him in order for President Trump to feel secure that he could beat Joe Biden in an election? Point number six is a question I haven't heard many people talk about, and that's, do the Bidens, do they really need to be investigated here? Point number seven is, do we need to know the origin of the Russian collusion hoax? As there was a lot of time and money and official effort spent on this investigation. And point number eight is, how can this whole this Ukrainian thing be interpreted as a quid pro quo by President Trump when he did not withhold any aid to Ukraine? Even if he did, they still ended up with the aid, but the investigation was not started based on that, from what I could see. but I've heard other things saying that the investigation was going on long before the phone call. So there's a lot of stuff going on here. We've got a lot of moving parts. So I guess to start off, my first issue was about not hearing about any firsthand witnesses being called to testify in this impeachment inquiry, which is really not an impeachment, it's just an inquiry, because as far as I know, they may have done a House vote on an impeachment inquiry, but there hasn't been a vote on actual impeachment process. And I guess I have a problem with people claiming to wield the power of a body that has not voted for it. So how can Adam Schiff be empowered? And I guess this is actually another point. How can Adam Schiff be empowered to wield the power of the House of Representatives when there hasn't been a House of Representatives vote on an inquiry, on an impeachment? Maybe on an inquiry, but an inquiry is different from an actual impeachment. It's everything with attorneys. It seems to always devolve into an argument or about terms, the usage of legal terms. And understand, most people don't understand this, is that a word has a different meaning than a term. A term is our words that are used in a specific setting have specific definitions. So see, terms, legal terms, or a term in the courtroom will have a different meaning than it does in everyday conversation. And a lot of people don't understand that about legal stuff. And I didn't understand it for a long time myself until I started really studying law in depth. And that's why they called it legalese, because a word can mean one thing as you're just talking with your friends on the street, but it can have the direct opposite meaning in a court of law or in a legal setting. And that's really something that's really hard for a lot of people to wrap their minds around. So anyway, these hearings, they basically have all this hearsay, so-called evidence in the courtroom. And what hearsay is defined as an out-of-court statement made in court to prove the truth of a matter asserted. These out-of-court statements do not have to be spoken words, but they can also constitute documents or even body language. Now, the significance of the hearsay rule is that the rule against hearsay was designed to prevent gossip from being offered to convict someone. Now, I know this is not technically is not a court procedure or a court process, but I think fairness demands that if you have claims, they should be some way substantiated, or they should be valid. They should be from people who actually have firsthand knowledge of what's going on. Now, there are exceptions to the hearsay rule, and you have 23 exceptions in the federal rules, which I brought up right here. Most of them are really technical, and they're only for certain settings, but the biggest ones is present sense impression, an excited utterance, or a then existing in mental, emotional, physical condition. But then you have other ones: statement made for medical diagnosis, recorded recollection, records of regularly conducted activity, absence of a record and it goes on and on here. But most of these don't apply to this impeachment proceeding deal. So talking about that, that just gives me a cause for concern, because they just don't have anybody who actually was on the phone call in question. And also, the people that were on the phone call didn't have a problem. Like the Ukrainian president didn't have a problem with the phone call. He didn't feel like he was being leveraged or anything like that, from his own words. point number two would be denial of due process. From what I could see, President Trump and the Republicans are not being allowed to present their case, really. I was just watching just a few moments ago, and the ranking Republican member of the House wanted to yield some of his time to one of the other Congress people, or House of Representatives person, to ask her questions, and Adam Schiff steps in and will not let him do it. Now, normally I've never seen anybody do that before. Not that I watch C-SPAN that much, but it just seems really funny, because if it's his time for him to do what he wants to do, why can't he devote or donate some of his time to somebody else who has some pertinent questions about this whole hearing? But anyway, the thing about due process is really a foundational legal principle in the legal system of America. Really should be in all countries, even though they may or may not honor it, but it should be, because it's a foundation. And what due process is the legal requirement that the state must respect all legal rights that are owed to a person. Due process balances the power of law of the land and protects the individual person from it. So what happens is, when a government harms a person without following the exact course of the law, this constitutes a due process violation, which offends the rule of law. And where this came from is a long history, legal history, and you can use just two examples. If you think about the Salem witch trials or the Inquisition, where these people with power set up these crazy, unsustainable or these conditions to a prosecution that are just not fair to people. And it turns justice into a travesty, or a kangaroo court, or a star chamber hearing, or just a basic situation where you can't win because they stack the rules to get the conviction. This does happen even with this due process and the Constitution, all these different things. You still have prosecutors, zealous prosecutors, that put innocent people in jail. It happens to this day. It might not happen as much as it used to, but mark my words, it does happen. So it just doesn't smack of fairness for this Adam Schiff to have secret hearings in basements in the skiff and all this kind of stuff, where it's not open to public scrutiny. Because from what I can see, the only reason you want to have a secret proceeding is to hide something that you're doing. Because if what you were doing was above board, you would feel no need to hide it. The third thing I noticed, point 3, is selective investigation. Now, from what I could see, President Trump has been under investigation, pretty much just about as long as he's been the president, holding the office of president. But my question is, why is there such a push to not investigate the Bidens? Why? In the midst of rampant corruption in the Ukraine, and Joe Biden comes up with this thing to pressure this prosecutor in the Ukraine. It's just funny to me, and I'm just wondering why President Trump is, open to any kind of investigation anybody wants to throw, whereas Joe Biden is, we can't investigate him. Is no, after he's on video, it basically admitting, not just admitting, but bragging about leveraging the Ukraine to fire a guy, so they could get some much needed federal aid. And then point number 4 is, even if you accept what President Trump said about requesting an investigation by the Ukraine, I never heard him say anything about making up dirt on anybody. But if he requested an investigation into this guy, I don't see where the harm is, because all that's going to happen with an investigation is either you're going to uncover corruption or crimes and then the guy gets what he deserved, or he will get exonerated and they will find no evidence of this so-called corruption. So I don't see where the big injustice is. People get investigated all the time. Nobody wants to be investigated, but I think that's how the whole system works, is that people get investigated if it's suspected that they've done something wrong. So point number 5 just is more of a question I had to, how really plausible this is. I mean, that's not really evidence, but what I'm really wondering is, do you think, or do people really think that President Trump felt that he had the need to create or have somebody create some kind of crimes or criminal or dirt or whatever on Joe Biden in order to beat him in the 2020 election? I mean, this guy, he couldn't verbally joust with Joy Behar on the doggone View. When he felt up some woman or something, and the woman wanted an apology, and Joy Behar was hemming him up, and he just went to stuttering and stammering, and he got incoherent. But one thing he didn't do was apologize. And Joe Biden has a long history that's not as relevant to this, but it's relevant in that this guy, he's not really the sharpest knife in the drawer. He's not the most deft politician out there right now. So I find it really hard to believe that President Trump felt the need to dig up dirt on this guy, because this guy is kind of like a mistake waiting to happen. Point number 6 is another concern I had, and I don't see this being asked in the mainstream media. And my question is, do the Bidens need to be investigated? And just from what we've seen from mainstream media sources, even though they're real biased, I mean, this guy, his son, everywhere this guy goes, his son follows. And next thing you know, the son got a big fat contract. Now, it may be legal and not against the regulations and law and stuff, but we know that's really unsavory behavior. This really, just because something is legal doesn't make it, ethically correct, I guess we can say. Because let's think about this. This guy, he's got the son cashing in on his influence. That's, influence peddling. So then it's a pattern, because it's been definitely shown to happen in China and in the Ukraine. And word is it's also happening in Romania, and I'm sure there's other places as well, if it's been happening in these 3 places. It's just, if this is the way this guy operates, it wouldn't be a stretch for him to do this around other places. So point number 7 is, I think we need to know where this Russian collusion hoax originated, because all it turned out to be is another smear campaign against the president. They may have caught a few little people, that weren't central to what the president was doing. But as far as anything with the president, these people did not prove any type of collusion or nothing worthy of conversation, for what I could see, after spending $30 million in 2 years on an investigation. It just seems to be a really poor use of resources and time, when the time could have been spent trying to help the people of the country, more so than just a witch hunt for the president, or the endless investigations. It was so bad till I just assumed that the president was going, after this Russian collusion thing, that they were basically going to be ready just to walk him straight from the White House straight to prison, is the way it was portrayed by the mainstream media. And imagine my surprise when I actually sat and watched some of the hearing to see exactly how stupid it was. It was really baseless. It was pointless. It was stupid. It was ridiculous. It was an insult to anybody would have a brain because I mean it was like nothing to it. I mean I couldn't believe, I couldn't believe it. And I guess point number 8 is I'm wondering how the president's actions could be interpreted as a quid pro quo when, from what I could see, the Ukraine ended up getting the aid and they didn't initiate any investigation on the Bidens, or on, which really wasn't an investigation on the Bidens, it was an investigation on this corrupt company known as Burisma Holdings, which had a long history of corruption, and it had corrupt members on the board. They worked with a corrupt bank. I mean, it was just corruption everywhere. And then when the president asked them to investigate it, now it's a problem. Not only that, but that actually the U.S. has an agreement with the Ukraine to share information and to work together on criminal investigations, which was put into effect by President Bill Clinton back in 1999, if I remember correctly. So, and even with all that, how can it be a quid pro quo without a quid or pro? Or a quid or quo? I mean, even if, because this doesn't even make sense. Because even if you start an investigation, it's not guaranteed you're gonna get a conviction. An investigation is just an investigation. I mean, look at what they've been investigating Donald Trump for the last 2 years. Now it's another investigation. I mean, how many investigations are gonna run this guy? How many investigations are gonna run? When you had all these other presidents doing all this other stuff, and I'm not even going to get into that, and no investigation on any of these clowns. So, I guess with all that, those are just a few of the questions I had about it, and I don't see them being addressed by any of these mainstream media things, outlets. They just gloss over stuff, and it's just like you keep dumping on people with. It looks like the old Nazi strategy where they say if you keep saying something long enough and loud enough, people start to believe it. I mean, that's all I'm seeing here. I'm not seeing any real substance with any of this stuff. It's all innuendo, and it's all, hearsay, and it's all I felt this way, and we don't need the transcript because he used back channels and all this kind of stuff. But from what I could see, it really looks like the president had to use back channels because the FBI and the CIA appear to not be doing any type of substantive investigation on some of these other players and a lot of this corruption that's been going on for so long in D.C. I didn't see him get all worked up about all this stuff that Hillary Clinton was doing, Obama was doing, that the Bushes were doing, and Bill Clinton was doing all their corruption. I don't see any investigation or anything with all this stuff, with all these endless wars we fighting everywhere. It's benefiting the military-industrial complex, but it's not benefiting the people. We the people. I mean, these people have the ear of Washington D.C., whether it's Democrat or Republican, and these people seems like they never saw a war they didn't want to fight. To use our children to go die for these companies. I mean, General Smedley Butler, way back in the day, he actually uncovered. He was like the most decorated soldier in World War I, but they recruited him to actually run a coup. A military coup on D.C. way back when, and so he played along like he was going to go along with it until he could prove it and get all the names of all the people involved in it, and then he blew the whistle on them instead of actually going through with it. And then he wrote a book called War is a Racket, where he basically said that he thought For all this time, he thought he was fighting for his country. And in the final analysis, when he really looked at what was really going on, is that he was just a hitman for big corporate interests. And that's the same thing that's been going on ever since then. That's why Eisenhower talked about the military industrial complex. He actually named it. And that's what these people are, which is also why they got rid of JFK, because JFK was trying to do the same thing President Clinton is doing here by shutting down all these endless wars and these people profiteering off of the United States. And with all these people working together in this deep state thing, for this oligarchical control thing, because all this stuff is not just happening at random. It's just not. Because these people, they're intelligent enough to amass all this money. They're intelligent enough to keep the golden goose producing money. And the golden goose is fighting wars. That's why the U.S. has hundreds of military bases all over the world, because these people get paid to sell guns, to sell weapons. It just goes on and on. But I digress. Anyway, that's just some food for thought, and you should really think about it before you believe the mainstream media, because the mainstream media is in bed with the military-industrial complex and with these oligarchs, because that's the side of the bread that is buttered for them. Those are the people that pay them. They're all in it together. So with that said, I'm going to sign off, and I will talk to you later. And make sure you subscribe, join, leave a comment or whatever on your opinion about these topics, because they are very, very important topics. Because we can either stay on the course for what all these people before President Trump had the country on the course of, and which was on the course of us becoming a third world country. I mean, these people are the ones, they decimated our manufacturing base. They've empowered China. They've empowered other countries at the detriment of us. Meanwhile, they all getting enriched. And they take care of their own, but they're not taking care of us. So think about that. I guess one last thing I could say is that if you look at the Democratic Party, they're infested with a lot of socialists. And if you were alive back in the 70s or 80s, you could see the big enemy was supposed to be the United Russia, the Soviet Union. And we see what happened with the Soviet Union. In '89, it collapsed because socialism does not work. It does not work. I'm not saying capitalism is perfect, but I'm pretty sure it works better than socialism. Socialism sounds good, but in practice, it just turns into an oligarchy, whereby the only people that really make it are either connected to the government or are in the government, because it simply destroys economies, because people just don't have incentive to produce if they're going to lose the bulk of their production or majority of their production to giveaways or to be taxed away, because nobody wants to work for 10 to 20 or 30% of what they earn. It's just not in line with human nature. Nobody wants to make $100 and have to give 80 of it to somebody else. That's not fair, and you have to kind of be an idiot to work under conditions like that, to work hard, to give up the majority of the fruits of your own labor to somebody else who didn't earn it. So with that said, I hope this resonates with you. With that said, take it easy.